Hello, everyone. I hope that we're in the air now. Right now, we're live. Thank you for joining our webinar today. It's Taavi Tamkivi here from Salv, and I'm really happy that many people have joined us today to listen our discussion about sanctions and how to control the sanctions and how to find potential matches and how to filter out the ones which are not true matches. And here in this panel today, I have three wonderful people who are true experts in that field and who are willing to share their knowledge and thoughts around the topic. So, but before introducing my good friends and business partners here, so I just wanted to share with the listeners why are we doing this webinar, first of all, because we are all busy people, and I assume that I know that you're also busy people. I was thinking 9 years ago when I started my work at TransferWise, now Wise it's called, as a head of compliance, and I had to take responsibility also for sanction screening together with everything else around monitoring and risk assessment and anti-fraud. Then I really didn't understand the sanctions too much, to be honest. And I was trying to learn why I'm checking the sanctions, and I understood that it's coming from terrorist financing and from politics. And always I saw the mostly poor customers whose names were constantly being hit by the sanction alerts. These poor customers were suffering, and when I was trying to learn why they're suffering or why these algorithms or systems cannot be made better, there was no clear answer for that. And as a mathematician, I was trying to dig into the algorithms that my team was using back then, and different providers were offering back then. And then usually the best answer I got was that, okay, we're using fuzzy logic, and you can fine tune the fuzzy logic score from 90 to 95, and that's it, you take it or leave it. And I didn't understand what's behind this fuzzy logic. Or when I was trying to figure out where are they getting these lists that they're giving to me, or how often they're updating these lists, or how these lists are organized. It was very, very hard to come to the real understanding how the process behind actually worked. And for me, as a head of compliance and responsible for technology inside of one company, it was actually very hard to make fair decisions. And all I could do is I just had to hire more people to do the manual work, which wasn't maybe the most intelligent way to resolve it. And over the last 9 years, I've been educating myself around the policies, around the requirements, around technologies. And obviously throughout these years, starting from 2014 and so on, the overall sanctions regimes have become much harder, ending up where we are today, which is really different world comparing to times we had 9 years ago. And that's the main reason why we're running this webinar here as well. It's just to share experts from experts to experts, our experience and knowledge, how we are resolving these problems and how we see how to tackle these issues operationally, technically, data-wise, policy-wise, risk assessment-wise, and maybe you can get some good ideas out from this discussion. At least I'm hoping to learn a lot from my today's panelists, who are Siiri Grabbi from LHV Bank, which is the biggest Estonian bank in UK. She's a financial sanctions officer. There is Rodrigo, who is responsible for the risk and compliance and the expert risk and compliance in Dow Jones, and finally Jaanus Liigand, who is data science team lead at Salv. He's my colleague. And myself, I'm a founder and CEO of Salv, which is a company which is producing different types of technologies and products for the AML and sanction teams, including sanction screening products as well. But to continue, actually, I will just give a word to each of my panelists today, so we can actually introduce a bit of your background and your experience. And then the people on the call, you will have possibilities, options to ask questions. So please use this opportunity to write down your questions to the panelists. I hope that most of you are following us over the videolevels.com webpage. So if you scroll down from the video, then you see there is another window which is opening, which is visible, shows the Q&A, and you can straight type in this form your questions, and over the call we will answer these questions. My co-panelists will answer the questions. Also, there is a link to the polls, which I will introduce later, but we're asking some feedback from you or some thoughts from you as well on the poll format. I promise it won't be too much of those, but it would be actually good to learn a bit about you as well. And also, like, there is other way to submit the questions. If you type in slido.com and the Slido page, there is a separate hashtag you can enter, which is sanctions. If you enter the sanctions as hashtag into Slido page, you're taken also to this Q&A and polls page. So whatever works better for you, either you're on the video levels page where you can see Q&A and polls under the screen if you scroll down, or you go to the slido.com and see the materials over there. So please use this opportunity, and I hope that we can answer your questions as well. But back to my co-speakers, panelists, just giving just for a minute or two or 3-minute intro to each of you. Siiri, maybe you can just start and tell to the audience who you are and where you're coming from and what's your background.
Hi, yes, I'm Siiri, and thank you, Taavi, for acknowledging, first of all, that 9 years ago you didn't understand sanctions either. As many don't still until today, despite at least I gave my best to bring the knowledge not only to the tech world, but also to other people. So my background is, or I used to be a diplomat, and I worked at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs for a bit over 12 years. And most of the time I was on the positions dealing with sanctions. I was sitting in Brussels behind the negotiation table when the extensive Iran sanctions package was agreed, and also when the first round of Russia sanctions were put in place. And now I am trying to share my knowledge and experience in private sector. I have been to LHV for almost a year now as an FSO, and I'm still keeping up as well with my mission that I had when I was a diplomat, to train people around me on sanctions.
Thank you. And just you triggered another question that I've always wanted to ask from you. Like, I found it out quite recently, actually, that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is like main owner of the sanctions regimes and not Ministry of Finance. Coming from the industry, I was always working with regulators and also like talking with the people from central banks and FIUs, and like for me, always sanctions as a part of the compliance regime was under the Ministry of Finance for me. And then when I started to speak with you, I found out that, wow, there's MFA actually involved, and which now kind of makes sense for me. But what's the background of that? Is it just a historical decision which was made 30 years ago by someone, or like
that's something. When you go back to the what is the purpose of sanctions, then it is a political measure next to the, or to avoid military measures in cases of human rights violations, weapons of mass destruction programs, and so on. So that is why it's under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is the joint agreement by many countries to come to the agreement. And as sanctions do not only involve asset freeze or other type of financial sanctions, it involves different types of things, like diplomatic sanctions, where you're just stopping any diplomatic cooperation, or as well restrictions on admission and so on. And they are all put in one package, at least in the European Union. So that somebody would have the coordinating role, then it is kind of obvious and the easiest if the coordinating role lays to Foreign Ministry.
Thank you for that. And we'll definitely come back to this wider topic, because for me, since this winter, since the spring when the war started, I've realized that the sanctions is like maybe the only or one of the most powerful non-lethal weapon that Western countries can use, and this is coming from foreign politics definitely, which now makes more sense than ever for me. Thank you. But just to move on to Rodrigo, who's next on the call, maybe you want to introduce what are you doing and what's your background and how can you help contribute into today's discussion here?
Of course, thank you, Taavi, for inviting me. My name is Rodrigo Espinosa. I'm based in London, and I have been working for about 15 years now in the business information industry. In the last 9.5 years, specifically with Dow Jones in the risk and compliance division. So I work with clients across the EMEA region, supporting them with the data and solutions that they use to help them comply with their sanctions requirements as well as anti-money laundering. So hopefully, to be able to bring that data perspective into today's discussion.
Just ask a follow-up question also from you. You said that you've been working in the business information industry for the last 15 years. And for me, Dow Jones and crime fighting, but looking from distance, they don't seem very similar. Like, what's the link between the sanctions and the Dow Jones, which is, I think, mostly dealing with the news and information in more general level?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I mean, I think the average person will know about Dow Jones and will think about the index, and it is true. We are the same company that created the index more than 100 years ago. Dow Jones also has a B2C division, which publishes the Wall Street Journal. And then within B2B, essentially today we have risk and compliance and other news and information businesses, right? And the history is about 20 years ago, and this is publicly available. UBS, they were using Factiva, the global news archive, which is owned by Dow Jones, to start identifying high-risk customers and politically exposed persons and start effectively building a list. At some point, they realized, well, we're a bank, this is not really our business, and they asked Dow Jones to continue that work for them. And that's how we were brought by one of our customers into the risk and compliance space, initially creating what was the first database of politically exposed persons, and then shortly after that, expanding into other areas such as sanctions, adverse media, as well as ownership and control data.
Thank you. And like, it's basically, it could mean that there is a great chance that many of us, if like when we're becoming a customer of the bank or the fintech, and we're working with our the financial institution directly, then actually somewhere behind there is actually your support hidden as well, which is helping banks and fintechs to do their work with us actually. Thank you for that. And last but not least, there is Jaanus, who's a data scientist. Maybe you can just also explain how did you get into this world and what are you doing here?
So yeah, like last 4 years, I've been in Salv, and what we are doing, we're building different technology to fight financial crime. Sanction screening is one of them. And I think like the data science or my team main contribution is next to the mathematical algorithms. We also extract the very rich data from Dow Jones, and we have the very rich data from our customers, and make this using this, make it possible to automate human decisions or basically teach cultural background to our system. So what we do is we do very efficient sanction screening and learn every day what we can do better.
And just as a data scientist myself, also, I know that they're like super interesting, complex areas like natural language processing and biostatistics and bioinformation. And image and video recognition and all these super cool AI technologies which all need data scientists. But here in your case, you're talking about comparing two lists, like one name against other list, seeing if it matches or not. Like what has it to do with data science? Like why it's interesting for you?
First of all, is with current financial situation. So we do not have a couple of transactions per day. So we have a lot of them. And, we need to screen so quickly that no one notices it. So what we do is less than a second, more like a 400 milliseconds, which is one challenge. And the other part is it's nice to have data, but you need to make decisions to get to really take advantage of the data. So how to extract the most important data for that particular decision is what we do.
Making this data operational usable under the conditions that your clients or end users do not want to wait for minutes or even tens of seconds. They want to get the response back really quickly if the account is open or frozen, or why it's frozen. And if you have like a huge number of customers who are waiting, then probably it cannot give a good impression about the company, like as a financial service provider. So thank you for this all the introductions that you gave, and I hope that our audience has now also better context about like the level of expertise we have on the call, and you can ask the questions from us on the chat. Just full disclosure, originally we were trying to ask a question also from you, Paul, like what's your level of engagement in the sanctions work? Like are you policy maker, or are you operational specialist, or are just interested to listen what's going on? But then we thought that, okay, let's skip this question, because the people joining this call, I hope that none of you is here randomly, and you have some good reason why you want to get your head around sanctions regimes and controls and products and data and technology. So I'm not asking from you how engaged you are in sanctions, because we assume that you're pretty much in this, and this is already driving our questions and the depth of the answers or discussions. So I'm asking my panelists here not to hold yourself back if you want to go deeper into details. I hope that our audience is actually experienced enough to think along, and if you're not, then please ask questions from us. But yeah, like to move on with the discussion. Actually, yes, as mentioned many times, the current war, of course, it's emotionally really hard. We're watching what's happening with our friends and ex-colleagues or colleagues in Ukraine. We're like watching what constantly media, what our governments are doing in terms of new sanction packages. Like just yesterday, I think it was yesterday, news came out that UK has sanctioned another Russian top second richest man because his support to the war. And again, like that for the readers of the newspaper, it feels that okay, emotionally it's the right thing to do, but actually the machinery that we are running as a technology providers, as data providers, as a banks, as a fintechs, the single name change made by the politicians, it triggered a chain of different events and different actions. And quite often, some of these actions or this kind of flow didn't exist before the 24th of February. Some processes definitely were there, and these keep running. But some things are completely new, or at least the regime and rhythm that we need to follow is something that we never thought about like 5 months ago. And let's briefly dig into these topics a bit more deeper. Like what are the key challenges that banks and fintechs have around sanction screening as of this year, and like what has changed since the war started and since the new sanctions against Russia and Belarus were released, and what became like more important for your teams as a technology provider or as a data provider or as a bank? And maybe the workload has changed I can guess in what direction, but maybe we can start with this workload question to Siiri, and others can amend. I know that we can read from the news that LHV as a bank is doing super well, and your markets are probably growing, which could mean also that the sanctions work is growing. But maybe you can just elaborate more on like what has the war and the new sanction regimes cost for your team and your area of responsibilities, Siiri?
Oh, well, the war definitely made a great change, and I think that it's not only we in LHV or we in Estonia or we in the Baltic region, but this is something that applies to most of the Western world, or you could say to the most of the world, as there are so many people around with Slavic names. And since the names are so similar to each other, then there's pretty high chance that there's somebody with a similar name and with the fuzzy logic together, there's an alert created. So there's a huge amount of alerts, of course, and it changes daily, as you said, that constantly new lists coming up, which triggers once again the old Salv cases to jump up because of the good listings or other previous functions do not work properly anymore, as there has been a change to the regime. And of course, for us, as we also have the bank or the branch for the moment in UK, we are also following the UK sanctions, which not all of the financial institutions in Estonia or in the region too. So for that, we even have greater amount of work. So basically, we are running the marathon with the speed of sprint. And I guess everybody is trying to do that for the moment, as you said, we all have friends and ex-colleagues in Ukraine, and we all want to give our best for the war to end and for the atrocities to be stopped. So and as there are so many alerts created daily, and of course we want to give the best experience to our clients. That means that from one hand, yes, we need to do more hiring. I have to do more training as there are new people coming in. They all need to be trained. Since the Estonian market is so small, the population is so small, and the chance to find somebody to join the team who already has previous experience is close to zero, as all the banks are requiring the staff. So at least I'm by now quite well trained in training myself. And of course, with the hiring, you have to think that it takes more time, which means more cooperation with Jaanus. If not daily, then at least weekly, to improve as well the technology, to teach the technology, the culture, the understanding, and find ways how to best use the data that is coming along with the payments. And of course, what is one of the most difficult things for the time being is the ownership and control criteria that is mentioned in the EU sanctions. So as soon as the company is owned or controlled by a subject who is under asset freeze, then you have to as well freeze the asset of the company, or you cannot make the funds available. Which means that the information doesn't always pop up in the system so quickly, as the data is not always visible, and as well the lists are not updated always that quickly. I mean, the ownership and control lists. One thing is to just take those names that are put in the lists by politicians, or diplomats, And then it's completely different story to find then the links. And they're not always traceable. And the issue behind this as well, that they're layered, they're hidden. There are no public data available. Russia has started hiding the information already since 2014, where it is very difficult to even find company registration numbers and so on. So there are a lot of issues coming from there. And as well, we were not used to investigating that much into EU internal payments. But right now, as there are Russian ownership in quite many companies inside the EU as well, then those companies as well lay under sanctions. And which makes it even more difficult is that despite there is one EU regulation, the interpretation of different member states on the ownership or control criteria differs. So we are trying to find the good balance in implementing everything as well as possible based on the criteria set to us by the Estonian FIU. But there is always quite high chance that some payments just go through or come through from as well other EU countries that we don't even know that are or could be under sanctions. Although Estonian FIU has been very transparent and open and is communicating with us frequently, still they don't own the information either. So they cannot tell us that these and these and these companies are owned or controlled by oligarchs, for example.
Thank you for this overview. It was like really triggered many other questions in my head, at least. I'm trying to hold myself back. You talked about hiring, training, technology configuration, different countries' expectations, information availability, and so on. Maybe Rodrigo, you want to continue as Siiri ended up with Siiri mentioned a few times the information that's needed to map out the ownership, understanding what countries, even inside of Europe, like have different needs, like different definitions of the ownership, like what is it, 20% or 50% ownership, but also other like similar names, like Slavic names, which are fairly similar to each other, and like how to filter out the sanctioned versus non-sanctioned names. Rodrigo, maybe you can open a bit your world as well. How much your work has changed over the recent month, and your customer expectations, have they increased or grown? In which directions?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there is, as you said, Siiri triggered so many different topics that we can maybe discuss in a little more detail. But generally, I would say, because sanctions has been at the center of the international response to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and this response is clearly unprecedented in scale, speed, coordination. It just creates a very dynamic situation and a constantly changing landscape. So in essence, it means for our clients that there will be a much larger number of sanction subjects that they will need to screen against. It creates more operational pressure for them. And even, as Siiri said, expanding the scope of sanctions against previously sanctioned subjects. So that triggers, obviously, new reviews. In terms of, obviously, the reaction that we've seen from our customers, on one side, the higher volume of names on sanctions list means having to work more closely with us to understand. Obviously, mostly I would say, especially during those last couple of weeks in February and during March, to get the reassurance from Dow Jones that we were very proactive in obviously being quick at updating the lists and doing that at the quality standard that is expected from Dow Jones, right? Obviously, the speed at which these changes took place and the amount of changes is something that our main contact, our customers, they were being asked by their boards, and the question is, what are you doing? So it meant that Dow Jones had to produce a lot of statements to share with clients, be really transparent and open about our processes, how quickly lists are being updated, and as much as producing an FAQ where our customers could go in real time, and as and when new lists were being published by the EU, by the UK, and so on, being able to see there, Dow Jones is already working on this. Dow Jones has already updated this, because otherwise the back and forth with the customer service team was getting unmanageable. So yeah, in that sense, I don't think in my 10 years at Dow Jones, I have never seen so many emails coming from clients during weekends, for example. So it just talks about, you know, the workload increase as well. Perhaps just to dive a little bit deeper on the ownership and control, you know, point that Siiri raised. It's certainly been, I would say, for a number of years, an area of interest for our clients. But yeah, the interest we've seen in the last couple of months, yeah, we have never seen anything like this. So the background is, back in 2014, with the annexation of Crimea, there started to be, you know, guidance and FAQs from regulators around the fact that it's not really just the sanctioned subjects that you know would be technically blocked or restricted depending on the regulations. It's also the companies owned or controlled by these subjects, right? And then 2014, based on these you know, guidance documents and client feedback, Dow Jones has started to compile a list of those companies which we could identify as being owned or controlled by sanctioned subjects. In terms of timing, obviously this is a very different process from updating a list. So if you take a list that's coming from a regulator, you know, you can get it done typically very, very quickly. In most cases, in a matter of hours, you have an updated profile already enriched. On the other hand, if you have a name of an oligarch and all of a sudden you have to find any company in the world that's owned controlled by them, that, and especially given the size and the avalanche of new sanctioned subjects that we've seen during this period, it's a process that can easily take weeks, right? So it was also about communicating with our clients, being transparent about the effort involved in creating this content. And yeah, obviously, if it involves additional resources, certainly from our side, growing our teams, particularly with Russian speaking members. But yeah, you can even see in terms of the volume of the sanctions control and ownership data set in our database, right? On one side, you have everything that comes from sanctions lists. On the other side, you have sanctions control and ownership, which is, you know, these companies which are indirectly sanctioned, let's say. So by the beginning of February this year, the database had around 27,000 records in this category of companies owned or controlled by, you know, sanctioned subjects in, you know, by OFAC, EU, or UK. Between February and now, we've seen an addition of 3,000 records. So the database in 3 months grew by more than 10%. 3,000 is the number of records that have been creating during all of 2021. So you can see how much, you know, what a significant increase in the volume and new records we've seen during this period. The complexity is very significant, as Siiri said, because particularly companies in Russia, for example, will do the best they can to hide this information. So it involves looking for leads. It involves media research, and the EU has mentioned this in recent guidance as a best practice, conducting media research to identify these type of companies, going straight to registries from various countries around the world, looking at companies' annual reports. And often something we've seen works well is if a company in Russia may not need to disclose all of the shareholding information we would like them to be disclosing, often they may have a subsidiary elsewhere in Europe with different regulations which may require them to publish more information. So we can often, by looking at those links, we can find information maybe in a company annual report from a subsidiary that wasn't really present in the company annual report of the Russian entity itself. So yeah, it takes a lot of experience, a lot of research expertise, and obviously language capabilities as well. because you could be looking at, researching in corporate registries from anywhere around the world. So an example of what that research process could look like is we see a news article, and that news article mentions a company in Ireland owned by indirectly by a Russian oligarch. And we go to the registry in Ireland. We may need to pay a local provider to obtain the latest beneficial ownership information. We can see they go to Cyprus, and then we have to go to the Cyprus registry. We can see the owner is an entity in the BVI, and we use a third-party partner to help us pull the BVI information. And there you go. That's owned by two family members of a sanctioned oligarch, right? So a lot of complexity but also a lot of value in terms of being able to deliver this to our customers alongside the sanctions data, the pure sanctions data coming from the list.
Thank you, and then you raised several good points also. Again, you reminded me my start of this sanctions and compliance work 9 years ago, when I didn't use any of the suppliers, any of the data suppliers services to get the sanctioned names. I just went to UN, UK, EU, US OFAC homepages, and I downloaded the CSV file. I uploaded the CSV file into our systems, and based on the algorithms, all the customer names got checked against these downloaded files. And I did it regularly to keep it up to date. And that kind of worked. And when we started to use one external supplier for the list, it was just the main reason was to reduce my manual work. Instead of downloading CSV file, I got some bigger CSV file automatically from some provider. But actually, like a few years later, in 2014, and especially now, there is no chance anymore that when doing only this like manual data gathering ourselves, like as a financial, if I would be a bank or like financial technology provider, if I would go and download the names of sanctioned people from like UN and UK respective web pages, that would be good, but that wouldn't be sufficient, because I would need to do extra manual work to do research. Also, like what are the companies or like ships or luxury super yachts which are owned by the people who are listed by the government, but this ownership is not listed by the government. And this is like real hard work, which I'm like now seeing that your team and maybe a few others are doing in the world, but that's definitely something I couldn't imagine that, like if I would be running a compliance team in the bank or fintech, I would ask my team to do this kind of data gathering by themselves. So that's like major, huge value proposition that I think it's important for people to realize that if you're not tracking these ownership companies, and you think that the data I'm getting directly from the government, that's enough, that it's a misinterpretation, and it's not enough actually. You're not compliant if you're not getting this extra ownership data. And even like, I think it was like even a year ago, when many people in the compliance world, they were not sure, that they thought it was voluntary thing to gather this extra data, but it's not extra data, it's mandatory data in these days. Is it like also your understanding, Rodrigo?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think especially now in all of the new conversations we have with clients, I would say it's pretty much an expectation to provide sanctions control and ownership coverage beyond the basic sanction screening. But as you said, even apart from the sanctions ownership, which is an obvious one, even working by downloading lists directly these days in this current climate, because you have sanctions lists being updated pretty much every day, and then you see something, the EU will add a name, and a couple of days later, the UK will add them as well, and then a few days later, the OFAC will do the same. So if you're exposed to those regulators, then it means that you'll be looking at the same alert 3 times. And often the response is coordinated. So maybe on the same day, you'll see the 3 regulators at the same name, right? So there's a lot of value in the consolidation of the data. So the fact that, you can work with one unique list that is already bringing the content in a consolidated manner that's coming from any regulators that you're exposed to and that you have to respond to, right? And similarly, obviously, the work involved in downloading these lists and managing that internally, we see more and more it's not something that regulators firms just want to do because of the workload involved and because of the efficiencies. There have been independent assessments done around the efficiency between, you know, comparing downloading lists separately and screening against those and working with a consolidated list. And the volume of alerts gets reduced by at least 30% when you work with a consolidated list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just somehow reminded me in old days, people, we used to use this yellow pages or phone books when you had a physical book listed down all the contact details of the people and addresses of the companies, and it was like really decent work. It was way before Google and before internet. The decent work that people did actually to gather this information together from different sources. And this book was maybe the most popular book in the world, like in this country. And like no one thought about creating their own like phone book or yellow page book manually. So that's kind of similar situation. But as Siiri and Rodrigo both you referred to also the technical challenges about how to like frequency of data uploads, configurability of the like setup of the rules, risk appetite. Maybe Jaanus, you want to take it forward from here and as a technology provider, explain like what are maybe the major changes you have seen happening in the last couple of months with the customer expectations from your side.
Yep, it's indeed true that a lot of has changed. And yes, Dow Jones has a great data, and previously once a day it really felt that it's enough that we update. But right now there is expectations that we do it 3 times a day. So our customers want to be really on time with when the sanctions apply. So every new transaction flying through their system is checked against the most up-to-date sanction lists. So this is like one part. The lists are not just once a day, but 3 times a day. And the other part is like a lot changed over the night. So right now what we do is this automations helping to describe the human decision processes. And we use rules for that right now. And the ability to first come up with the rules, second test out to really check if it's according to your risk appetite. This needs to be really quick. And I see a lot this collaboration or synergy between LHV and Salv, that their agents see something, we propose a rule, we run the test, and Siiri confirms or says that try again. And so this is a really quick iterative process, and so we can go over very quickly. And from technical part, I think it's also important to point out, especially for Russian sanctions, it seems how hard can a name be, but if the name original script is completely different from a Latin alphabet with Cyrillic keys, then different countries and different languages transliterate names very differently. And also the language technology tends to be heavily weighed towards English speaking part of the world, but a lot of European countries have their own systems how they transliterate names. So it's really important to check, and Dow Jones is also doing, and to go over that we have all possible transliterations that we cover. And also, which is maybe common for us in this region to understand the Russian naming system, but they are using also like the patronymic name or the name of the father in their official names. And that can confuse a lot of people that are not really accustomed to the Slavic names. So I would say like it's a very important is update list quickly test new ideas how to reduce the false positives and test it quickly.
You mentioned transliterations. It already sounds almost as complex as natural language processing, which you brought up as an example. So technically and scientifically, you can go deeply. It can become quite complex thing. Just that there is, I was watching the questions that we're getting. Thank you. We'll come back to the first question that we got, but actually the second question, I think it's quite relevant for the current discussion here as well, to Rodrigo and Jaanus. Like, how can you demonstrate the lists, like sanction lists are up to date in Salv or like any other provider? Is like how can you demonstrate to our customers that the lists are updated as expected? And I think it would be good to drill a bit more into details with that. It's not like, for me, to get the question, like, what is expected? Like, is it written in the law? How often is it real time? If, as Rodrigo said, that it's like different governments are releasing the sanctions in different frequency, maybe a couple of days difference. So it's like one thing is how can we demonstrate as technology providers and data providers, how can we demonstrate to our customers that everything is up to date? But what does it actually mean? Like, does it mean that we as a Salv, as a company, we're showing to LHV that yes, we got the list from Dow Jones and that timestamp and it was updated on the next timestamp? But how do we know that Dow Jones is up to date? Like, when did Dow Jones check the OFAC web page? Like, when was the OFAC web page updated based on the political decisions which was made like an hour ago or 2 hours ago? Like, maybe I can elaborate, like, what is the right timing and what is up to date? What does it actually mean, and how to give the confidence to the end users, sanction teams, that actually they are doing at least like data availability wise, they're doing what's actually required.
Yeah, so obviously what clients aim to do is as quickly as possible. That's typically what we hear. When we do see time frames, for example, when we participate in RFPs and our clients state what the requirements are, what we typically see is the expectation that sanctions list changes or are processed within 2 business days at a maximum, right? And here at Dow Jones, our commitment is to do it within 1 business day. So over the past 2 years, we obviously keep track of every update, and yeah, it's never taken more than 1 business day. Most changes will take a matter of hours, and it helps because we often already have profiles in the database for the people that were added. So if you think about the profile of the type of individual and company that were added during this last few months, many of them would be politicians, for example, which you already had as PEP profiles in our database. Some others would be state-owned companies in Russia, which we would also cover. Some others would be already under the sanctions control and ownership category because they were owner controlled by sanctions subjects. So that makes our job a little bit easier because we have a wider risk and compliance database that doesn't cover just sanctions, and that allows us to already have a pre-existing profile. Actually, around 60% of the profiles we already had in our database, if you look at everything that's particularly related to Russia. Another example would be obviously members of the Russian parliament, military, state-owned company executives. All of those would also be part of our politically exposed persons coverage. Many individuals, even outside of politicians, that were added, some examples of oligarchs, would be already under Ukrainian sanctions lists, which are part of our coverage. Not all clients screen against them, but they are included in our Dow Jones watch list. So that makes it a little bit easier. And obviously, you may have days when there's a handful of updates, but you may have days where, for example, New Zealand, they didn't have a list, and then next day now they have a list. So that means hundreds of names to be added from one day to the next, and obviously doing that analysis. But it's something we do within 1 business day, and to give clients a greater assurance that it's being done within this time period. we have our own quality teams, and we keep track of all of these KPIs, but we also engage with an external third party, with the Big Four, which they do 2 types of external audits. Number one, they look at our processes, our training, the technology we use to monitor the lists and making sure that that is adequate. And then secondly, they do a more practical test of our sanctions data. So they do a point-in-time comparison on a certain date at a certain time. They look at the sanctions list as it is from Dow Jones, and they compare that to the sanctions list published by the 8 major regulators around the world, including the EU, the UK, Hong Kong, US. And then they give us a score every year. We had that for the last 7 or 8 years now, and they give us a score, and we're very transparent that, sharing that with our customers and partners, again, as part of that, reassurance exercise to ensure that the data is as accurate, complete, and up to date as possible.
So to sum it up, it's like common sense says that you're doing it, you should be doing it, also Salv should be doing it as soon as possible, but there is a time, like this speed depends heavily on the type of the data points, as you mentioned before, about the ownership data, it takes maybe weeks and weeks to map out the whole hierarchical corporate structure that oligarchs is running. Also, when they're selling or buying, if they're already oligarchs for fixed as a sanctioned people, then if they are buying or selling new companies, then again, keeping it track, it cannot happen in real time. It takes time to research. But I think that how to ensure that you're doing it as fast as possible, and as committed to customers, you have independent internal and external people who are checking it and giving you assurance that you're doing the right thing. But just a Siiri, a triggered question also to you, because if you think about your previous role, you were diplomat, and let's say that you were writing sanctions, calling out sanctions, who should be sanctioned, and now you're in the end of this flow, that actually getting list from Dow Jones through Salv, applying operational procedures. Based on what you heard from Rodrigo, do you feel, and based on what you know that your expectations were in the previous role, do you feel comfortable that this kind of rhythm does make sense, or is it completely off from the expectations you had as a diplomat when listening how things are actually happening?
Well, by the book, the sanctions should be applied at the moment when they are published at the official journal of the European Union, at least the EU sanctions. So, of course, there is as well in the guidelines, it says that they should be applied within the reasonable time, and previously 24 hours was considered as to be a reasonable time. Nowadays, it has changed a bit. But for the previous question as well from the audience, I would reply that if you're questioning if somebody is already added to the list, then take a test. Put the name in the system and see if it already jumps up or not. This is something that I have tested, that when the new lists have come up and I have wanted to make sure that they are already in the system, I have just tested it. So first thing you can do in the current situation where we are all extremely busy, help yourself and find solutions. And then if you have any further questions or you cannot find the way out, then turn to those who know. But yeah, previously as well, as I said, that sanctions are a political measure. So I didn't have the expectations then or the illusion that you can actually find the person who is the member of the IRGC, and you don't have the date of birth, you don't have the name other than maybe major something. So that means you know the military rank, you don't have the picture, nothing. And of course, it gives the match with a lot of people who are not related to the person, considering that the names are so similar. So in reality, I don't think anybody expected to find each and every transaction, or the purpose is not to punish each and every person with the same name that the sanctioned person has, but it's rather to give the political signal that we are giving our best to stop the regime as it is.
Yeah, that kind of makes a lot of sense. But while saying that, knowing also that regulated companies are watched by the regulators and we are facing lots of audits as people tend to say, don't take it as investment advice. Like in our case also, like just whoever asked the question, you should actually know really well what is your regulator's expectation, how they're auditing, how they're controlling you, and then be more demanding towards us, based on your understanding what is the right timing and what will help you to prove to your own team and to auditors like what is sufficient and what's not sufficient. So like there are lots of people in our teams who are working to make it more transparent, more reliable, but it's like always very hard to predict like what is the end company's real target and expectations, and that's where you should be really active. Just before jumping further deeper into the data and technology, let's try out this poll option as well to see if it works. I'm just interesting as we're testing this technology first time. So you're all welcome to answer the poll. Question 1, as I said, it will become visible. It's already visible in this video levels. If you scroll down, you can see the question under the poll, a separate window, and you can see this also in this slido.com. So, and the question is like, what is the main strategy your own organization is using to tackle screening-related challenges, sanction screening-related challenges since February, assuming that you are dealing with sanction screening? Then please respond. You can answer one or many, like 0 to many answers actually to give. And please read through the options and give your answer. Let's take a pause for 10 or 15 seconds and we see results coming in, and then we can continue. Okay, thank you for all the people who voted. I think you can still add your votes as I'm speaking. So I see that 1/3 of the people have said that they have improved or they are improving the technology that they're using, and then like 1/4 says that improving the processes or training, and 1/5 works with a better data quality. And adding more people is only like 14 or 16% of people. So it's actually quite surprising for me, because based on the like quite emotional talks I've heard, it is more about hiring, which as well also from Siiri. But actually, it's great to see that also people are able to improve their technology and data as well. So let's actually continue on that topic on our discussion as well. It was briefly mentioned a few times that maybe Siiri, maybe you can drill further into details, like you said that you have been working with Jaanus to improve some rules, but based on my understanding, the screening rules or the screening expectations have not changed. Like you still need to, as you said, like it's on the EU level, it's said that sanctions will become effective as soon as they're announced. Rodrigo said that this ownership sanction screening has been actually in live already since 2014. So like rules wise, there doesn't seem to be anything changed. So like what technology can do to help to leverage this kind of increasing volumes and increasing complexity?
Well, you can teach the technology the culture. For example, the way the names are put together. The machine doesn't know the way Spanish names are created, but you can teach it to understand it, so that if there's clearly the way that the name is built up, and it could give the match on the other side, but if the names are reversed, for example, the family names, then and you only have match with one first names, then clearly it's a separate person. So you have to, and it's the same way with Slavic names. You can teach them the system as well, and especially when there's the father's name involved, and you can trace that as well. You can teach the machines to understand that those names are different due to the father's name is different, and so on. So yeah, this is what you can do best, is to teach the machines the culture as well. There are often that I see that are matching, for example, Estonian, really purely Estonian name matching with the Arabic name. And by fuzzy logic, yes, it really gives like 95 or even 98% of similarities. But still, there are the differences that you can teach the machine to make the difference. Why the fuzzy logic doesn't work?
Can you remember? Can you remember, or do you remember any examples like which you can say, like if it's not private?
Very similar names are, for example, Anu Tali and Abu Talib.
Yeah, sound-wise, if you type in these two random names into comparison, you will find probably quite high hit rate, actually.
Exactly, and then often what creates as well alerts is when the name of the private person or part of the name of the private person matches with the name of the company. As well, it can be just that, for example, a very typical name is a company called Mirza that is sanctioned, but it is as well very common family name. And it always creates a match. So you can just teach the machine to understand what is a company and what is a private person. And that is how you can improve it. Or as well, you can teach the machine to understand what is written on 3 lines, for example, the payment description. That is included, so that whenever it is mentioning insurance, it shouldn't give a match with hundreds of companies with the name of insurance under sanctions.
Like teaching culture to machine, it sounds like ultimate AI challenge. Like, but maybe Jaanus, you can elaborate a bit more. Like, how hard it is to teach the new culture to machines, to computers. What's behind it? Maybe you can just briefly explain.
I mean, it's really is like a culture specific. So probably if you train your system on Hispanic names, it can be really great on Hispanic names, but he's absolutely awful with Slavic names or Arabic names because the machine haven't seen them before. So he tries to memorize or kind of derive the connections between the names and logics. And the other part is why it's not that easy to train is a lot of language processing technology thinks of or is based on semantics of the meaning of the individual words. But a lot of names don't mean basically anything. So even my own name, so it really doesn't mean anything. So it's really hard to try to train or look at the similarities for a semantics level. But it's also like this Russian sanctions is also have helped a lot with other burning issues with the sanctions. It's like what I really like about Dow Jones data is that it isn't just the names, but it is for like person screening. It really helps like the date of birth, the gender of the person, the regions where where he or she has been or is related to. But also for companies, is really they dig out those registry numbers. And a lot of holding companies have something like XY Invest, and also a lot of Russian holding companies have something like XY Invest. But if you can check those registry numbers, so we can easily automate like the human decision. So they're obviously a false positive match. So it's really to try to have all the metadata about the sanction subject that Dow Jones is really providing is helping a lot. And it's nice to see that also, like the main issue is the transaction screening, but probably if you make a payment from one bank to another, you see that there is a very little data that you give in. So a name, and you write something to this payment description. But now, like to make the decision, so is this name the same like the Russian name or not? Is there a possibility that this is like an Estonian who has just the same name? But it's nice that Estonian banks already have like this, that we have this public key type national identification number. It's added to the payments information, so we can again extract data from transactions data, check the DOB from transactions data, and again DOB from Dow Jones data. So it's really that for non-technical person seems like a gibberish, but we can extract knowledge out of there and automate our process with that.
It's a good intro actually to the next question. We've got we've got quite many questions about the data and internal lists, like internal good and bad lists, or white lists and black lists. But it's like maybe each of you can answer like what data points about the individual, not about company, but about the individual, are crucial to achieve an accurate sanction screening results. Like, is it true positive or true negative? True negative, yes. But it's like you mentioned several times, like transaction data, date of birth, reference. Maybe from Siiri's point of view, from Rodrigo's, could there be a fixed list of data points that, okay, if I have these 3 data fields, then I'm safe and everything else is extra? Or is it always depends on the conditions? So what kind of data fields I can use? And if I don't have these data fields, if I don't see anything about this transaction, can I let it go? Or like, what's the wider background of these data points that I should definitely check, and what are the voluntarily check controllable?
Well, date of birth is definitely something that can give quite good assurance whether somebody is the person under sanctions or not. Of course, it's not always the case, as I mentioned before. It can just be an Iranian general listed without any date of birth, so it doesn't help. It doesn't help the machine either to say that it's a false positive. So you really have to look into it and dig into it, and even then it's not enough. Although you can quite easily say that if a person is born in 1992, it cannot be a general in Iran or in Syria, but this is a culture you cannot teach the machine either. You need to know something about military ranking systems in different countries and how it's built up. So for that, you have to, if you don't know it yourself, you have to search for Google's help. But if you have together date of birth and the address, then that in 99.99 cases helps you to eliminate the suspicion.
Like address, date of birth, and the name itself, of course, as well.
Yes, of course.
But the challenge is that like if you're checking people who are not your customers, but the counterparties, then who are not who don't have any relationship with your company, then it's like really hard to get these data fields. So you need to make approximations. So like you cannot use these clear. So it's like fairly easy to define what's sufficient to make good decisions, but it's really hard to obtain these data points which are sufficient to make a good decision.
Exactly, especially on the outgoing payments, you just don't have the information. And Taavi, even if I'm making a payment to you, I don't know your date of birth. So
yes.
if somebody with your name would be sanctioned as well, then I would have to turn to you when any of the banks would turn to me and ask your date of birth. I would have to ask it from you and give it then to my financial service provider. And this is actually how it works as well. We do send a lot of RFIs out to people. And of course, that means a lot of manual work as well.
That's exactly like one really illustrative example how like financial technology, financial revolutions to make people's lives easier are being slowed down by the regulatory needs and by the fight against sanctioned people, and which we understand both things, but how to find the balance of priority between those two is like really hard. There is another question, maybe Rodrigo or Jaanus can answer. Like when using Salv with the Dow Jones, where is the best place to manage internal watch lists? And maybe we can amend also, like extend the question, like what are the potential internal watch lists that you can think of, or like there are official sanctions which are clear-ish, but what are the internal watch lists that you have seen or you have heard about?
So what I've heard from our customers is that also some local FIUs are the risk appetite is maybe even lower, or they want to take less risk, and so also mention some of the company names that even like on official level are not sanctions, but there are definitely ties between those companies with the sanctioned ones. There is also internal watch lists or blacklists they call, so they want to do business with. So, and it can be that those names are also Slavic origin or different, so they also may cause a lot of issues for you. So it's, but yeah, for us, for Salv technology perspective, it's we use them as the Dow Jones watch list. So you can configure an additional screening, and you can screen your own watch list.
So it's like ultimately it doesn't matter that much from where these lists are coming from. It's like with the Dow Jones, it's easy. There is a guaranteed updating process in place, and all the data fields and everything is there. But if adding data, which is coming from other sources, they're like being provided by the local FIUs in some strange format or being built by the team itself. Technically it works and you can do the screening, checking, but the data quality and like refresh cycle is not that well controlled. Do I get it right? Yes,
yeah, this is totally up to customer to where they get this additional data, how they get it, how often they update. This is totally up to them. So, but that's this official sanctions list. We have a great cooperation and very efficient integration with Dow Jones. So this is very transparent, up to date, 3 times a day.
And Rodrigo, like there is another question. I think you mentioned at the beginning of our call, the whitelisting, or like not sure what's the right term for that. Like without the previous process, like of whitelisting, if a fintech or bank doesn't have a process for whitelisting their customers who have been like maybe they have triggered the sanction hit once and they have cleared it up and they don't want to screen them anymore. How should the financial company start setting up one with a provider of Salv, with Salv, or like actually I think in the least risky way, or like I would almost like Salv is in the brackets here, but like because like you have been working with this many times that people names get triggered many times and actually don't want to see them over and over again. So how would you advise people can start setting up this kind of good list under case?
Well, I think what's important to note is, and it probably goes back to the difference between working with different lists that you download from a regulator and working with a consolidated list. What Dow Jones will provide is a consolidated list which has a unique identifier for each person and for each entity. So that's a key piece of information, because if you've already said that's a false positive, and it's not my client, for example, any subsequent updates to that record, let's say they get added to another sanctions list, you can easily identify that, and you've already made that connection, that link. Obviously, if you have a new, and Dow Jones will already do the heavy lifting of understanding whether the person on the EU list is the same person as the person just added to the UK list, right? So having that unique identifier is what allows a system to be able to make smart decisions and prevent double work. And this is particularly relevant in the last few months. We've seen a record number of not only additions, but also removals from sanctions lists and changes and edits to sanctions lists. I was just collecting ahead of the call some stats from our data team. If you look at the average, and I'm looking only at the key OFAC EU and UK sanctions lists, on a monthly basis, the average in the last 6 months of last year was around 275 updates a month, right? If you look at February, we had already ramped up to 1,000. In March, that was already 10 times greater than the average last year. In April and May, slowed down compared to March, but still 5 times greater than the average. So obviously, all of these things translate into alerts, translate into more operational pressure for our teams, and goes back to the challenges around training and hiring. And I think that's also why we're seeing more requests from clients to help them with remediation projects, or sometimes to outsource part of the work because they just kind of cope internally, and hiring is really hard, and recruiting is really hard. So we're seeing a little bit of that as well. So either one-off sanity checks or remediation exercises to clear backlogs, or just totally outsourcing teams completely. It is worth saying as well that the same pressure is also true for the regulators themselves, right? And OFSI, the UK sanctions regulator, has publicly said that their team has had to double in size, and they continue to grow. And obviously that means that there's also a learning curve, and there will be new people doing totally a new job. And something interesting that we've seen as well is the error rate from part of the regulator has been much, much higher, right? And then sometimes clients will ask us, well, what do you know when you identify that there's an error? And we work closely with the regulators, feeding this back to them. It's well known that some countries, some governments around the world will work together. And Siiri, you may know this much better than me, but for example, Canada and the UK, right? So many of their actions will be coordinated. And obviously, if you look at the date of birth system in Canada, it's different from the UK, right? Month, day, year, and then year, month, day, month, year in the case of the UK. So we do sometimes see things coming, for example, on a UK list with a date of birth that's the other way around. And we can tell that name had already been added to the EU, and we're pretty sure it's the same person. So we'll feed that back. We have to add the information to our data feed as it is published by the regulator. But if we're very confident that the correct date is a different one, we will add it as well as an alternative date, so that the client, will not have to wait for the correction from the regulator, which can sometimes take a day, a couple of days, or a week. So that's something interesting that we're seeing. And it's been, we've seen publicly regulators actively looking to hire Russian speakers, right? Because if you look at the EU, for example, they have more language capabilities, and you can tell that there aren't as many errors, but in other countries such as the UK, there aren't that many language capabilities. So these errors, it's something we see a little bit more. So yeah, it goes back to because of the size of this response from a sanctions perspective, it's not only an impact for the regulated firms, but also for the regulators themselves.
And I really liked your first point that first of all, like how to start setting up the good list is actually to organize your data based on the IDs, or you need to have like if your own customers have unique IDs, maybe their counterparties should have their unique IDs, but also like if you're getting the data about sanctioned people and entities and related entities, then it's much easier to start building any next layers if you have proper IDs in place. This is like very similar to people who are like aware of the Estonian X road or like a government system. Then each citizen of Estonia has their unique ID, which is being used by the banks and by the government institutions. And this ID doesn't expose any privacy data, but it just like helps to identify uniquely the persons, and like each organization can add their own data about us on top of that, and it makes it so much easier to organize these kind of complex questions. I know that UK has selected a different route, and there is no centralized government unique ID for the persons, and there is like private sector organizations are maintaining their own ID system, but it helps definitely. And then on the top of that, you can start building decisioning, like, okay, if I have checked this person once, like, and it was a good person, like how often I should double check them, and so on. So there is another like really concrete question, like, would you recommend to remove profile of dead people, deceased people? I think it's both ends, like if you get the information that that someone who used to be sanctioned, they are now dead, like maybe Rodrigo, not sure, but are you updating and removing this profile already from a list? And the second question is also maybe for the series, like if your customer is dead, but you see transactions coming in for this customer and sanctioning is happening. I'm not sure what's meant with the question exactly, but maybe you can expose both ends.
Yeah, I can answer how we would address that from a data perspective, and then I'll let the interesting part to Siiri. Part of our monitoring process is if we identify that an individual on a sanctions list or a pet for that matter, or anyone else in our database has passed away, that we have a deceased field, right? So that deceased field will say yes or no, and that gives clients the flexibility to either use that name as part of their filtering criteria or to exclude it should they want to exclude it.
Thank you. Siiri, do you have any views from the banking side as well, like how to, like maybe not seeing this kind of hits at all? That's not the question at all.
Well, it is. We see very often that someone is giving the hit with the person that you are identifying is deceased, but is still subject to sanctions. And there is as well a very simple political reason why this deceased person has not removed from the sanctions list. It is because usually if somebody is sanctioned, especially if you think of, for example, as well, Osama bin Laden, then he's still under sanctions list. And it is because it is this person and persons related to them. So if you delist somebody, then you as well take off the chance to sanction those people who are related to. Milosevic was dead for, I don't know, 15 years or something after he was removed from the EU sanctions list. But the vice versa, if I really haven't seen a case where the client has deceased and still receives payments.
But yeah, the first example is really true. I was just thinking we can all say that okay, in the financial sector, yeah, we see that the account is closed and sanctioned, and Osama bin Laden named bank accounts maybe are not too many left open. But at the same time, in terms of ownership of the real estate or like of some luxury goods, these ownership records are not updated properly in many of the countries, and these names can still show up, and also other the relatives or like group members can still use on their behalf. So that's really valid question and valid answer as well. So the thing is that to start to summarize, it's like in the sanctions world, there are not too many places where you can cut the corners and make it easier. It's rather vice versa. There are like more dimensions and more expectations and more data volumes are coming up, and emotional is getting much more important for us. And that's as a technologist and data person, I really see that the only way how we can handle this is like by adding more intelligent information technology software, getting more like better quality data, knowing how to use this data, checking like using more like conscious way, using our own internal data fields. I remember like with one of our customers, like we're checking I think 8 or 9 different data fields of each different transaction. So it's not only about checking the name field, but there are many other fields that can be checked. So these kind of things, like being smarter how this internal data is used. We need to end our discussions just in a few minutes. There are many topics that we didn't have time to cover. One thing I'm really interested to learn more is actually about if and how the risk-based approach can be applied in the sanctions world. We know that the risk-based approach is like in overall customer profile, customer management, but how much risk actually you can take when making a decision to raise alert or I don't raise alert. Like, is it zero tolerance, or is it like actually some financial threshold, or is the risk appetite coming from the type of sanction and so on? So that's like one big puzzle that I would love to discuss about. Then from the audience also, like I would love to ask many interesting poll questions about like what are the things that have the biggest positive impact on you when thinking what have you changed in your organization or your technology. How long does it take to clean up the sanction alert? Is it good if it takes short time, or is it actually good if it takes long time? And so there are many discussions. So what I'm pointing out is that there's a great chance that we will have another similar session quite soon, or in a few months' time, just to drill further into details. So please, all the listeners, please contact with us if you have more questions, more ideas what to listen, where to head to with our discussions. We would be happy to do that, because as I said, the main goal of today's call was just to spread the knowledge, become smarter ourselves, and hopefully you got some good ideas out from that as well. So thank you all for listening us, and also thank you for sharing your thoughts and discussions, Rodrigo, Siiri, and Jaanus, and I'm really hoping to come back in some time with you in these discussions. Thank you, and have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.